Well, hey, church, thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Chris Erickson, one of the pastors here. And I want to say welcome. Welcome if you are here sitting with me at the West location, my people at the East location, our brothers at RCMU, or maybe if you're even out on a boat at the lake, which if you are, we'll all be there soon, so save some room. I just wanted to say thank you guys. Welcome. We are in our third week of this series called Life Hacks, and we're giving practical steps to some of the problems that we face every day in our life and just principles that we can be applying. The last 2 weeks, we have been able to walk through these simple steps on how to make something important like integrity a part of our life. Last week, Pastor David talked about being content and what that means, and again, just these simple applications that we can apply in our everyday life to help us become content in life. And today, in our third week, I get to share something that is really dear to my heart, and that's legacy. It's not something a whole lot of us think about a lot, especially people my age, but legacy is extremely important. I thought, what better way to kick off this legacy conversation than with a man who understood just how important legacy was. The man I'm talking about is this guy right here, a man by the name of Alfred. As you could tell, that picture was taken a while ago. He lived a long time ago, probably in the 70s, maybe the 80s. I don't know. I wasn't alive. But he was a Swedish inventor, engineer, physicist, chemist. The man was brilliant, and he loved explosives. He was completely passionate about that, which I'm sure his parents just loved. But he realized that at that time, what they had for explosives was really dangerous. See, when he was around, the only thing they had was this thing called nitroglycerin, which was very unstable, very dangerous. It wasn't something you wanted to control, and it killed a lot of people who tried. And so Alfred made it his life's work to make a substance or an explosive agent that was more controllable, more efficient. Well, after years of research, he invented this thing that we now know as dynamite. He invented that and a few other agents that revolutionized different businesses, the mining business, the construction business, militaries, governments would buy this thing called dynamite from Alfred, this inventor who just loved explosives. He ended up making quite a bit of money off of these inventions and had himself a really good life. I mean, he invented something that we now all know as a very common thing, this dynamite. So he did very well for himself. Well, one day, he's sitting eating breakfast and was reading the newspaper and decided to flip to the obituaries. Recently, his brother had just passed away, and so he wanted to look in there to see if he could read his brother's obituary. And when he was reading, he realized that the newspaper had made a mistake. See, they thought it was Alfred who had passed away instead of his brother. And so his obituary was in the newspaper. Now, as weird as this is, what a great opportunity to get some insight on what people think about you. I mean, we don't get to read our obituary because it's something people say about us after we're gone. So for Alfred, this is extremely cool. I mean, he's now getting excited thinking, wow, what are people going to remember me for? What are they going to say? It's my inventions or my businesses or all these countries or companies that I've helped because of what I've done. And as he gets to the top, he sees the title of the article of his obituary, which read this: Merchant of Death is dead. It probably wasn't what Alfred was expecting. It came as a bit of a shock as he's reading this article that the newspaper said that Alfred made his money finding new and faster ways to kill people than anyone ever had before. See, the newspaper was highlighting the fact that he was selling this stuff to militaries in countries that were at war, and they were using them in battle, and because of that, dynamite was killing people. And so what he left behind was the merchant of death. He realized two things that day. First, that this merchant of death, this is what he was going to be leaving behind. This was his legacy. The second thing was that he didn't want this to be what people remembered him for. So in that moment, he decided he was going to change what he left behind. He was going to change his legacy. Ended up investing over 90% of his fortune into creating these awards that would be given out to people who were excelling in things like science and humanitarian aid and literary work, people who were promoting peace worldwide, because he didn't want to be known as a man of war anymore. He wanted to be known as a man of peace. And just to make sure people remembered him for that, he put his own last name on the prize. Today, the Nobel Peace Prize is one of the most prestigious awards someone can be given. And it's all because a man named Alfred Nobel saw his legacy and realized he didn't like it and decided he wanted to change it. Whether or not you agree with this, the truth is that all of us have a legacy. And here's what I mean by legacy specifically. A legacy is what we leave behind. It's how we're going to be remembered. It's the influences we're going to have in people. Our legacy is what people remember about us and what we pass on after we're gone. And all of us leave something behind. Which is a good thing, because the Bible actually wants us to. We're instructed to leave something behind. In Proverbs, it says this: good people leave behind an inheritance to their grandchildren. Now, I'm sure when you read that, you see the word inheritance, and instantly you think, okay, money, I'm supposed to leave money behind. Which would be great if all of our grandparents left us just this mound of money, but that's not specifically what it's talking about. What it's saying is that we are supposed to leave an impression behind to our grandchildren. We're supposed to pass on something that will influence them, specifically in a godly way. Now, it's up to us, knowing this, to be intentional with that. Because we can decide to be intentional with what we leave behind, or unintentional. We could just not care. So I wanted to give you an example today of what an unintentional legacy is, just so you can understand it. So I actually have a bit of a game show for us to play here in church, because we all love games. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list off some stuff that this person left behind. And I want you guys to think in your head, don't shout it out, but just kind of guess in your head if you know who I'm talking about. So here's just some information, some things this person left behind us. First, they were a football player in the National Football League. And they weren't just good, they were great. He was actually a Hall of Fame running back. And in his career, there were 4 different seasons that he led the NFL in rushing yards, something that very few people have done. And in fact, he still holds the record today of the fastest running back to reach 2,000 yards in a season. Now, there's only about a dozen people who have ever even accomplished this, and he has done it the fastest. So pretty incredible. Do you guys think you know who I'm talking about? If not, let me give you another hint. Now, when you see this, you probably are thinking to yourself, well, that's not a football player. That's someone else. When you see this white Bronco, immediately, football is not what comes to mind. Now, if you don't know who I'm talking about right now, I'm talking about this man, O.J. Simpson. Probably all know him. And when we think about him, it's not his football stats. We're probably debating in our minds whether or not he did or didn't do it, which, you know what, we can just put that argument to bed. He definitely didn't do it. This is an example of an unintentional legacy. Do you think O.J. wants people to remember him for this? Probably not. Probably would love for us to remember everything he did in football or that he did on television. This is a great example of an unintentional legacy. Now, thankfully, the Bible has actually given us some really good examples of people intentionally leaving behind a godly legacy. There's one specifically I wanted to share today. It's about a man by the name of Nehemiah. Now, if you don't know who Nehemiah is, he's got himself a whole book in the Bible, which means he must be pretty important. But where it starts is Nehemiah is actually the cupbearer to the king of Babylon. Just to give you a little bit of context, Nehemiah is a Jewish man living in the country of Babylon. See, at that time, his people were actually captured from their country, taken to Babylon to be prisoners, and after a few years, they were released to either go back to their country of Israel or Judah or stay in Babylon, and he decided to stay because this was a really good job. Now, and it sounds weird, but his whole job was taking care of the king's drinks. So just imagine today, if your one job was to make sure Donald Trump's drinks were safe. It's probably pretty easy because who would ever want to mess with Donald Trump's drinks? No one's got a problem with him, so it's going to be safe. The same thing could be said about the cupbearer for the king. There was a lot of assassination attempts and a lot of stuff that people tried doing where they're poisoning them or just different things that they had somebody specifically set aside to make sure his drink was safe. Now, this person wasn't just any Joe Schmo off the street. They had to be trustworthy. The king had to trust them with his life. So they were pretty close to the king. So Nehemiah and the king, they were tight. The king also gets thirsty fairly often, and so he lived there in the palace and was there with the king just about all the time. So truthfully, he didn't have to think or worry about a whole lot of other stuff. He didn't have to worry about what he was going to eat, where he was going to, what he was going to drink, where he was going to stay, his money, his clothes. He didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. This was actually probably one of the best jobs a Jewish person in Babylon could have ever gotten. And he had himself a pretty great life. Well, one day his brother came to visit with some other people. And his brother did move back. They moved back to Jerusalem, the city where they came from, and they were there visiting, and Nehemiah asked them, just how everything was going, and was a little shocked by their response. This is what they said. They said to me, "Things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." Now, I want you to understand something, that when the gates of a city are destroyed and stay destroyed, it's a defeated city. They're literally living in squalor and disgrace and shame. They don't even care enough to rebuild their own city. That's how hurting these people are. Just imagine if your house burns down tomorrow and you decide, I'm not even going to bother rebuilding. I'm just going to live in the ruins. That's how sad and depressed and defeated the people of Jerusalem were. And it shocked Nehemiah. See, he hadn't given them a whole lot of thought, but this one rocked him to his core. And this is how Nehemiah responded. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. Nehemiah was not expecting this, and he wasn't really thinking about it. But it broke his heart to know that his people were suffering like that. And he started praying and probably having this dialogue with God of why are you letting this happen? Why are this great city that you loved so much, why is it just in shambles now? Why do you not care about it? And as he started praying, he began to realize, no, God does care. And in fact, in one of his prayers, he reminds God how much he cares about the city of Jerusalem. And he prays this. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful to me, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands and live by them, then even if you are exiled to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place I have chosen for my name to be honored. See, Nehemiah was struggling because he thought, Lord, there has to be something better for Jerusalem than this. I mean, this can't be the legacy that we leave behind, this city of ruins. This can't be what we leave behind. There's got to be something better. And you care about what we leave behind because you even say, I will bring you back to this city that you will honor me in. And as he begins to pray and wrestle through this, God starts to put on his heart that it's Nehemiah who's supposed to do something about it. See, God cares about what's left behind. And he's also hoping that Nehemiah does something. So he ends his prayer this way. The people you rescued by your great power and strong hand are your servants, O Lord. Please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it in his heart to be kind to me. See, Nehemiah knew that it was him who had to do something. He had to be the one to intentionally take action. What was left behind mattered to God, and God wanted it to matter to Nehemiah as well. Like I said earlier, this idea of a legacy matters a lot to me. I think about it a lot more than probably other people my age do. And I never really thought I would. But see, I realized at a point that my legacy mattered to God. I grew up in a fairly dysfunctional household. The relationship, the marriage that my parents had wasn't a healthy one. It was really built on a lot of disrespect and mistrust, and it unfortunately led to a lot of arguing and hurt and pain and eventually divorce. And I vowed when I was younger I would never, ever have a relationship like them. I would not be anything like them. Well, like most people who vow not to be like their parents, they turn out just like their parents. Every relationship I would get into would be built on disrespect and mistrust and eventually hurt and pain, and it would always end ugly. Well, I never really connected these dots. I just suffered through these relationships. Well, one day, a few years back, I was talking to somebody and getting to know them, and I told them my name, and my last name specifically, Erickson. And what normally happens when I share my last name, I'll have somebody say, oh yeah, I know Ericksons. Who's your parents? I probably know them. And I'm always like, well, no, you don't, because there's a lot of Ericksons. Leaf had a ton of kids. But I'd normally say my parents' name, and they'd be like, oh, yep, I have no idea. Well, this person actually knew my parents. And their response wasn't that great. They actually apologized for what I had to go through growing up and what I had to witness and how tough it must have been. And I didn't think a lot of it in the moment, but as I walked away, I remember thinking, wow, God, is that the legacy I'm going to leave behind? That all Ericksons are just going to struggle in relationships. That's our legacy. Ericksons are going to have bad relationships. There's got to be something more. I don't want to leave that behind, Lord. And I started arguing with him. There's got to be something better than this, right? Like, this is a terrible legacy to leave behind. And he really pressed in, well, yeah, I want something better for you. But you have to want something better too. In that moment, I had to make the decision that it had to matter to me. I had to care about what I would be passing on. I want to ask you guys today, do you care about what you're passing on? You know what? A better question may be this. What do you care about the most? Is it your job? Is it your marriage or relationship? Is it your kids? Is it your community? Is it your popularity? Is it your belief system? Is it your security, your comfort? What do you care about the most? Because what you care about the most is what you'll pass on to the next. So knowing this, we need to make the decision of whether or not we're going to pass off a godly legacy or not, if we're going to be intentional or not about it. So today we have a few life hacks that I want to share with you. Some keys to leaving behind a godly legacy, we'll call them. The first one, if you want to leave behind a godly legacy, it takes intentionality. Here's what I mean by this. Look at what Nehemiah did when he realized he needed to do something. He went and had a conversation with his employer, the king, and said this: "With a prayer to God of heaven, I replied, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." He didn't just decide, okay, I should do something about this and then talk about it. He actually went and did something. He was intentional about acting, but he even took it a step farther. See, he didn't just sprint down to Jerusalem and say, okay, we're going to rebuild the wall. I'm not sure how, but we're going to do this. No, he actually had a plan. Look what else he asked the king. "I also said to the king, if it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah." Then he went on to say, "And then please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. See, he wasn't just walking into this blind. He made a plan. He was intentional. He knew that if he was going to do something, he needed to be intentional about what he was doing. He couldn't just sprint down and say, okay, let's do something. I realized that when I wanted to change my legacy, when I wanted to pass on a model of a relationship that's godly to my kids and my grandkids and anyone else, I needed to be intentional about that. I couldn't just say, okay, God, I want to leave something better behind, but whatever happens, happens. No, we have to be intentional about leaving behind a godly legacy. The second one is leaving behind a godly legacy means taking the focus off of you. If you realize something in the verse from the beginning, what struck Nehemiah was that they were suffering, not him. He was living a great life. They were suffering, his people, the people he didn't think about that often, and that struck him. See, in that moment, he wasn't thinking about himself. He wasn't focused on himself. He was focused on his people. And not just the people living there now, but the people who would be coming years and generations after them. His focus was on them, not him. We need to take the focus off of us. Now, I do want to give you a caution, a warning, if you will, because a lot of times you hear in church this same sort of thing, that you can't think about just yourself. You got to think about others. You can't be self-centered. You got to be like Jesus and think about the other people. Treat your neighbor as yourself. And you think, okay, well, I do that a lot. I focus on other people all the time. But I want to warn you, there's times we focus so much on something that even though it's not ourselves, we're forcing other people to focus on us. Here's what I mean. There are parents out there who focus so much on providing financially for their kids that they're willing to work every single hour of the day. But because of that, their kids are not the focus. There are parents who are so focused on their kids getting good grades or doing well in sports, or there are students who try so hard and they focus so hard in sports that they lose their focus in everything else. So maybe that your problem isn't taking the focus off of you. Maybe your problem is that you're pulling focus away from others. So the question I really want to ask is, does what you focus on pull focus away from others? I'll leave it at that and move on to the third key. The third one is this: leaving behind a godly legacy takes work. And that one just sucks, because none of us really like to work. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. There's no book out there that's leaving a legacy in 15 minutes or faster. It takes a lot of work. When Nehemiah left to go to Jerusalem. He didn't get there and say, okay, somebody build this wall. No, he had to actually build a wall. He couldn't just hope it would get there. He had to get his hands dirty. He had to work, and not only work a day or a weekend, because this wasn't a weekend project. This took time, months, years of work. We need to be willing to put in the time and effort that leaving behind a godly legacy deserves. I realized that when this became a priority, when I wanted to leave behind a godly legacy for my kids, it meant that I was going to have to put in the time. It meant that for me, I was going to have to let God work in my heart the way I really didn't want him to. And I was going to have to put in this time and energy and effort into doing it. Some of it was even going to counseling and saying, okay, God, I have some issues that I need to deal with. I have some baggage. We need to work on this. Sometimes the work you need to put on is yourself. Because there's work that we need to do within ourselves. Maybe it's we have some unforgiveness. Maybe there's some mindsets that we need to change. Maybe it's an attitude we have. Maybe it's bitterness or pain or our inability to trust people. Maybe it's our drive is so much on other things that we need to work on focusing on the godly things. Leaving behind a godly legacy takes work. The fourth and final one is this: leaving behind a godly legacy takes discipline. During Nehemiah's time rebuilding this wall, he was constantly at odds with other countries. They were constantly trying to stop what he was doing. And at any point, he could have decided, you know what, this is too much work. I don't have the time for this. I miss my job. I miss my good life. I want to go home. Or even doubt could have easily crept into his mind. But in these moments, he was disciplined. One specific time, this is how he responded. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding the wall. See, this is not a man who was going to be deterred. This was not a man that any little thing was going to stop him. It took discipline. A discipline that means taking your thoughts captive and making them obedient to Christ. A discipline that means I believe that God has me no matter what the circumstances are. A discipline that's not going to let us give up when God is trying to do something bigger than ourselves. Leaving behind a godly legacy takes discipline. Today, as we're wrestling with this idea of legacy and what we're leaving behind, maybe some of us haven't ever given this a thought. Maybe you've really never paid attention to what you are leaving behind right now, what your legacy is going to turn out to be. So maybe the first thing you need to do is ask yourself, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to leave behind for your kids, for your friends, for your community? What do you want to leave behind? What impression do you want to leave? What inheritance? Do you want it to be intentional or not? Do you want it to be godly or not? You need to decide if that matters to you. Another good way to word it would be, what do you want, or what will your obituary say? Alfred Nobel was not expecting his obituary to say, merchant of death is dead. We may not be expecting how people remember us, and it may not be in a good way. The great thing is that we have the opportunity to change it. And we have the opportunity to impact people in a godly way, because he cares about what we leave behind. Whether we do right now or not, it matters to God, and he wants it to be significant. So we need to make the choice. Does it matter to me? What do I want to leave behind? How do I want people to remember me? What impression do I want to leave on the people I talk to? You can even simplify it down a little bit. What impression do I want to leave on my friends, on my family, on my church, on my community? What do I want to leave behind? It should matter to us because it matters to God. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for making our lives more significant than what we believe, and giving us the opportunity to leave something behind that's more than ourselves, Lord. We have the opportunity to leave a godly inheritance for all of those we come in contact with. We have the opportunity to leave behind a legacy that says, I surrendered and gave all to God. We can leave behind a model of love and obedience to our Lord. That means we are willing to walk out whatever He has for us, knowing His hand is upon us. Lord, I thank you so much for caring about this. It matters so much to you. We matter so much to you, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Lord. Amen.